Welcome to GASP,
Growing and Aging Sex Positive.
Get ready to grow with us as we discuss all things sex and sexuality related.
I'm Nina.
And I'm Cari.
Today we're talking about gender and sexual orientation for parents, especially as the topic comes up during the middle school years, ages 12 to 14. These are such significant years. They're both wonderful and hard. And there have also been so many changes around gender and sexual orientation so quickly. It can be hard for parents to know what's happening, let alone how to support their kids.
We want to hear from you. What's on your mind? What questions or thoughts do you have about sex and sexuality? We will share questions and replies in a future episode. Write to us at gaspod@gmail.com. That's GASPPOD@gmail.com.
Without our sponsor, we wouldn't be here. Oak Park Our Whole Lives delivers extracurricular classes and workshops for kids and parents, as well as trainings for sex educators. To learn more, go to their website at www.opowl.org.
Let's go! Hi, Nina.
Hi, Cari.
So what are we talking about today?
We are talking about gender identity and sexual orientation.
I feel like we should take ownership of the fact that we're both a little winded and giggly because we are on the third time recording this introduction because of technical difficulties.
Yay.
Yay! But third time's the charm. We're talking about gender identity and sexual orientation, and specifically the way that these things might come up in middle school and how to parent youth through them. As always, should we start with a definition of gender identity and sexual orientation?
Oh, of course.
Us. We love a good definition.
Yeah. So gender identity just refers to how you understand yourself or how you feel yourself to be.
Yep. And then sexual orientation would be your feelings of attraction, sexual or romantic attraction to whichever gender or genders.
Yep. It's a really interesting intersection between these topics and middle school. When you think about all the changes and all the possibilities, maybe gender identity and sexual orientation are going through a puberty moment.
Maybe they are. I would like to believe that, because we certainly are finding ourselves with some of these topics being headline political rhetoric and really in the media and in our daily lives more than ever before. Sometimes that's really hard because sometimes it's in a harmful, scary way. But at least we're talking about it, because I surely don't remember anyone talking about gender identity when I was in middle school. Just wasn't a thing. There might have been some crass jokes made that were super transphobic, but there was certainly no real dialogue about what it meant to be queer or non-binary. And we'll talk more about those terms a little bit later. So middle school.
Yeah.
What a time to be a youth. What a time to parent.
Yeah.
It's a wild time. So typically when we think about middle schoolers, we're thinking about kiddos ages 12 to 14. And what's happening during that time is a major life transition, one of the big ones, and that's puberty.
Woohoo.
So just to call out that puberty, the age range for when puberty can start is pretty wide. So it could be as early as 8 years old and up to 14 years old. And that's just the beginning of puberty, so the onset. And typically puberty is going to continue for 3 or 4 years. So obviously there's some overlap with middle school years there, but it could be a little before middle school as well and could continue on into high school. So what are some of the changes that we see with our youth going through puberty?
Yeah. We can see youth starting to think more abstractly, starting to be more aware of the social world that they are in, maybe have concerns around justice, for example, is a big one. Yeah, and I think of it as this time when you're going from a child experience into a kind of introduction to your adult self.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that I really love about working with middle schoolers. There's a lot that can be especially challenging.
Yeah.
because there's so many feelings and
there's just so much change happening in such a short time period that it really, as a mom, reminded me of the toddler years. It's just a very intense time.
Yes.
Where your child is experiencing a huge amount of physical growth, intellectual growth, emotional growth. It's just so much change so quickly, which is exciting. And we do also find that the way that this can relate to gender identity and sexual orientation, and the reason that these kind of two worlds collide is because a huge part of middle school socially and developmentally is that, am I normal? Where do I fit into the world? Is this part of me normal? Who am I? What group is my group? And this craving for like peer relationships and acceptance. And it might be the first time in a young person's life that they're either experiencing feelings of desire or sexual attraction, or they're at least becoming aware that's happening in the social circles around them, right? Like it's the first time where you realize this is getting real. So it makes sense that issues of who am I and identity then converge with sexual orientation and gender identity.
Yeah, so absolutely.
So why, like, what is the case? Why do we care to talk about this? Like, why should parents care about this? Why can't we just not talk about it like we did in the early 2000s, the late 90s, early 2000s? Why can't we just pretend it's not around and have one or two token gay characters on a sitcom? And for the listeners, I am being totally sarcastic. That's not okay with me. Representation matters. But that is how I grew up, right? Like, it was like, I knew that there were gay people, but that was it. That was my full understanding. Yeah.
You were setting it up. So, these are burning questions for youth, right? And it can be really an important part of that transition from the child self to the adult self. You're trying to figure out who you are, where you belong, who your people are. And also when we look at the statistics, so as we adults who care about youth look at the statistics from youth who identify as queer in some way, we see some really concerning trends.
Yeah. And they are hard numbers to hear, for disclaimer for people.
Yeah. So these numbers come from the Trevor Project, which is an organization specifically to support trans youth, or queer youth, I should say. And they do an annual survey of youth 13 to 24. Now, we need to do our usual qualifications about surveys. These are subjective and they have limits because of that. I think that it's worth noting that some of these questions are questions that are very hard to obtain answers to any other way.
Yeah.
That relate to feelings of being accepted, maybe feelings of how you identify, and as well as thoughts or even actions towards ending one's life.
Yes. And they also would require the participant to disclose that they were, in fact, queer.
Yes. Yeah. This is a survey of queer youth, of LGBTQ plus youth.
Yeah.
It is hard to hear, but the numbers are so stark. So 39% of LGBTQ plus young people seriously considered attempting suicide in the last year.
Yeah.
Just in 1 year. And that number is higher for transgender and non-binary young people. It's 46%, just in that 1 year. And it does go even higher when we pull out young people of color specifically than for white young people.
Yes. So that intersectional place is difficult. So then we have some better statistics, or I don't want to say better. We have some statistics that might give you some optimism. All hope is not lost. I see that you have some statistics on here about parent and caregiver acceptance of queerness is associated with a much lower rate of suicide attempts. And you have the numbers 33 to 36% lower rate of suicide. Again, the 33
of suicide attempts.
Yes, of suicide attempts, which I guess is a little different than considering suicide.
Yeah.
So actual attempts. And the 33% decrease is for white youth and 36% for youth of color.
So that means that for youth of color who identify as queer are 36% less likely to attempt suicide if they experience acceptance from their parents and caregivers.
Yeah.
It's a big difference. So we as parents and caregivers of queer youth can make a big difference in their lives.
Yeah. Just the act of accepting their identity.
Yeah, yeah. And that is actually substantially higher specifically for Black youth. It's 47%.
So a 47% reduction in attempted suicides for queer Black youth who experience acceptance of their queerness by a parent or caregiver.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty spectacular. It's a difficult topic, but it gives me tremendous hope. Yeah.
And not only the acceptance from parents and caregivers, but also the value and importance of community support and acceptance. When schools are considered gender affirming or queer affirming by youth, those youth also report lower rates of attempted suicide.
So important. So not just the parent and caregiver, but also the school community needs to be affirming and accepting.
Yeah, that it makes a difference in like a life and death difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is really remarkable, I think. LGBTQ plus young people who report living in very accepting communities attempt suicide at less than half the rate of those living in very unaccepting communities. So these are very subjective terms, right? Very accepting, very unaccepting. But if it's your experience that you are living in a very accepting place, right, then that can have a huge influence on your choices about attempting suicide.
Yeah. So those are deep statistics. I feel a little bit cavalier, but now we're going to jump. We've used like a ton of terms, and I think it's important that we identify some of these terms and models for thinking about them.
So I just want to say it's really motivating for me. It's really powerful, the difference that communities can make. And part of what I want to be is I want to be part of making those communities more accepting.
Yeah.
Just out of care for our youth. And so that really motivates me as a sex educator.
Yeah.
To be here. And how do we help those communities become more accepting? One part of that is information. When we have more information, we can feel more comfortable talking about the topics. We might understand the terms more, right? Not feel left behind or feel like out of it in some way.
Yeah, I think that's a common feeling in this space. I don't remember a lot of these terms for specific orientations and gender identities ever being in my world when I was a young person. And I hear that from parents and caregivers and even educators, that it's like, if you don't have that common language or you feel like you haven't kept up with the youth, it's like really, you might want to be accepting, but if you don't know what terminology to use and what describes which group of people, it's hard to have that dialogue and feel comfortable. So you might have the emotional like desire to be accepting, but lack some of the tools to do that.
Yes, and young people can be a little unforgiving or a little critical sometimes of their older caregivers.
Middle schooler being critical that their mom, dad, or other caregiver doesn't know every single pride flag? Never. That doesn't sound like a middle schooler at all.
Skibbity Riz, Ohio, Cari.
No cap. And then I feel the deep urge to say 6'7". Guys, I have no idea what that means. It's been said to me for the last month. And they hold their hands up and they say 6'7".
You're lifting one hand and then the other hand.
Yeah. Somebody send us an email and tell me what it means. I've asked the youth. They tell me and I still don't get it.
I have not heard that. You
Go home and ask your middle schooler.
I
6,
will.
7.
I'm going to do that.
Hopefully it doesn't mean something terrible. I don't think so. I think we'll see. TBD.
Yeah. So we wanted to do a primer for parents who might be feeling a little in tension but out of it and worried about the differences. One model that is really useful is called the SEIO model. And this is a widely used acronym for the different aspects of sexuality that intersect in these ways. So that's SEIO. And we have in the show notes a link to a great handout on this called the Gender Unicorn.
So I love a good graphic.
Yes, you can check that out if you want. So S stands for sex assigned at birth, and that refers to essentially your observed genitalia. The baby comes out and people make a quick judgment about what gender box they belong to based on what they can see.
So, Nina, does everybody fit into a gender binary based on their genitals?
Cari, I'm so glad you asked. No, they don't.
Yeah.
There are about 2% of the population, or roughly, is what's called intersex. And that is roughly equivalent to the percent of the population that has red hair. So you can imagine how frequent that might be in your everyday life.
Yeah, and I'll just ask a follow-up question. There's a lot of ways people can be intersex. It could be external genitalia. It doesn't neatly fit into penis and scrotum or vulva and vagina, or it could be also hormonal, chromosomal. Does that 2% cover everything, or is that 2% just intersex by genitalia?
That also includes internal differences. That might be hormonal, it might be chromosomal, there might be internal genitalia that are not observed. Yeah. So there are many ways that someone can be intersex. And it's really important to include that because we still have, here and now today, not here, but we have infants experience surgery immediately after birth, what might get called gender affirming surgery, where doctors maybe in conjunction with parents, maybe parents are pressured to change their infant's body in a way that conforms more closely with gender norms.
Yep.
So that's the S, sex assigned at birth. And then we have E, SEIO. So E is expression, really refers to expression of gender.
Yeah, so is this like the external social markers of what your gender expression is? Your clothes, your hair, your aesthetic?
Yep. And it can include really subtle things, like tremendously subtle. How you sit in a chair is a very gendered activity in a way. It is and it isn't. It's absurd to think that it's gendered, but also people respond very differently.
At a social level, it's gendered. I don't mean it's biologically gendered. Yeah. At a social level, our body language is often heavily gendered and really culturally specific. Might not be the same in every community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's ways of talking are different. How we use our voices, the register of voice choose can be gender influenced. I know that when I was young, it came time to choose a musical instrument, and I chose flute. And it really, looking back on it, I know that I chose to play the flute, and I played the flute for 9 years.
Wow.
So pretty like every day, because it was the soprano sound.
Oh, it's so funny, but I picked violin. I wasn't a band kid. I was an orchestra kid. And oh my gosh, the instrument selection was so gendered.
Absolutely.
So gendered. And the only choices for me, I was going to play a stringed instrument because that was my family legacy. And there was only two options. You're either a violinist or a celloist. Like, you wouldn't be like a violaist. You wouldn't. No way. And I would, no band. Absolutely no band.
So, oh dear.
It's just very gender to me. I understand what you're saying. There was I don't know that I knew it at the time, but.
Are you saying that band was boys?
Yeah. In my school, band was heavily boys. And like saxophone and trumpet were very big mask instruments.
Was cello boys?
Cello was more boys than girls, but it was like a way you could like break the gender role without being too like, you could be femme and play cello.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a couple girls smattered in there, like the cool ones.
So this is that's fascinating.
I haven't spoken to anyone about this. I'm just
I know.
Till you said that, I didn't think about it, but
yeah, I not only did I play flute, but when I had a chance, I picked up the piccolo because I couldn't go high enough. I wanted that.
So funny.
Yes. Yeah.
So funny.
So all these ways that we have of signaling one another about our gender. And something that I find helpful in thinking about this is that this is where we talk about or use the terms feminine and masculine really refers to our expression because it has to do with how we move through the world with other people.
Yeah.
And what sort of messages we're sending to each other all the time. So we've got S and E.
Now we've got I.
Yep. The next one's I, and that is identity. So what's really useful about that is distinguishing it from the E, right? Yeah. So that femininity, masculinity is different from how we feel on the inside or how we identify with who we are. So that might be, right, man, woman, girl, boy. There might be other labels that we use as well.
Yeah.
So we often talk about trans man, trans woman. So transgender refers to someone whose identity is different from their sex assigned at birth. And the complementary term is cisgender, which refers to someone whose identity correlates to the sex assigned at birth.
Yeah.
There are, as Cari was saying earlier, there are a lot of labels here.
Yes.
And for example, I think it already came up, the non-binary category.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this can be understood as part of a transgender identity, depending on how you think about it, or it can be understood as distinct. So it just depends on who you're talking to, really, I think.
Yeah, and I guess I'll throw out there that as someone who has been in educational spaces talking about these terms, often with people of varying, self-identifying in different ways, I defer to the individual for how they identify, and I respect it. I don't like to get into these spaces of rigidity of terms. I'm going to defer to the individual to tell me if they're non-binary, if they include themselves under the trans umbrella, or if they don't. I don't require people to disclose to me, and I don't argue with people about their identity. And I think that can be a little freeing if you're nervous about using the wrong terms.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I think that the category of non-binary is really exciting in some ways.
Yeah.
There's a lot of newness there, a lot of freedom for some people, and a lot to explore and to see how it develops in the world.
Yeah. So then we have
O is orientation. So that refers to specifically our orientation or our feelings of attraction.
Yep.
And as you mentioned earlier, there can be different types of attraction. We might feel physical attraction. So that might be a kind of sexual attraction. We might feel emotional or romantic attraction. There's also aromantic forms of attraction where we might feel a kind of aesthetic attraction to someone who is very pretty without necessarily wanting to get to know that person or talk to them ever.
Side note that learning about the idea of aesthetic attraction just was so freeing to me and described such a disconnect that I'd had in myself for a number of years is like you can be aesthetically attracted to someone. That doesn't mean you're physically attracted to them. You could like the look of them. Doesn't mean your body's into them. And I found that there's so many cool ways that people experience attraction.
Yeah, it's a really, I think I like that too, because I never really made a lot of sense to me to hear my peers talking about, oh, that person, like that movie star or whatever, is so cute.
Yeah.
And I thought, how you don't even know that person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's an umbrella of terms here to orientation. Of course, there's many terms or labels that have proliferated in the last few years, or more than a few. But some of them would be gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual. There are more, but if you come across a term that you are unfamiliar with, that's an easy one to just Google.
It is.
Yeah.
And you'll find, again, I just always go back to, I defer to the person who is disclosing to me and what their definition is and what it means to them. And if the label is the one that feels right for them, it's the one I'm going to use, because you can really get into the weeds with definitions and terms for orientation. And that's okay. There's something really beautiful about that. And there's also something freeing about not needing every box to be perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for some people, like, pansexual is an aspect of being bisexual. There's no conflict there. Whereas for other people, they're different. And it's just, I'm not sure that there is one answer to that.
No.
So maybe something to ask about depending on the context.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do all these concepts and labels show up in middle school? Well, we've already talked about band and orchestra.
It's honestly not where I thought we were going to go this evening when we sat down to record this. And I feel a little awkward that I proclaimed that violin and cello were the only femme instruments in my school.
She just cut out all of band.
I know.
No woodwinds, no brass.
But if I was going to include anyone, it would be the woodwinds. We can talk about my experience at the European Youth Summer Music Camp several years in a row another time, Nina. We can deep dive into that.
Okay, good.
There was a wide variety of instruments at that camp. We can talk all about the different people. I don't know. That's something I want documented on a podcast, though. That was a large part of my middle school summer experience. So just throwing that out there.
Great.
So maybe I shouldn't have been surprised that band and orchestra was the topic. I can't shake the fact that I feel like I should be saying this one time at band camp. This one time at band camp.
But I'm sorry, not band, because
orchestra
Cari
camp.
would
The
not
European Youth Summer Music Camp. Get it right. There was also choral. So how does this show up for middle schoolers? I love what some of your life experience as a parent has been, and I don't know if you're comfortable sharing, but I love hearing about this because you have an area of expertise here and some.
Yes. So obviously I've been teaching about sex education, which includes gender identity and sexual orientation for a long time, but I did not know how it was going to show up in my own family. I honestly did not expect either of my kids to identify as queer. If you had asked me when they were 6 or 7 or 8, I would not have expected that to show up. But my older child, who is now 17, it was really interesting to me how they went through middle school and they tried on 9 different identity labels.
I love the freedom there. I just love it.
Yes. Yeah. So I got permission from them to share this. I share this all the time because it's just an example of how much change and figuring out there is for kids to do during these years, right? They're asking themselves who they are. And there's so much growth and change happening in this time. So what I learned from my parenting experience that I hadn't really learned as a sex educator was to really let it be what it was and just take my kid as they came to me on any given day.
Yeah.
It's really not about what label they feel fits them best, right? As a parent, I am going to love them the same regardless, right? And it's not really that this is a phase, which I think is a sort of patronizing,
harmful
approach.
Too. Yeah.
Yes. But to, as some people would say, just hold that lightly. Hold that part of your child lightly and let it be what it is.
And gender and sexuality can be fluid for many people of all ages throughout your lifetime. So I like that idea.
Yes, great point. Yeah, this is really true across the lifespan. People figure out new things about their own orientation when they're 45. New people come out as transgender after they retire. Like there's no rules about this.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it totally tracks for me that since sexuality is across the entire lifeline, that you're going to have different experiences at different ages. Like that all tracks for me perfectly.
And so it's not surprising that there should be a special time of growth in those middle school years.
Yeah. So then how do we talk to our kids about this? That seems to be the question I often get from parents.
Oh, yeah. And about sexuality in general, right?
Yep.
It is hard to bring that up and often awkward and uncomfortable for everybody.
And let's be honest, depending on where your kid is at, sometimes your middle schooler is going to be very receptive and sometimes they're going to be mortified or they're going to act like they're not hearing you at all. And that's just part of it. Like that's part of the parenting journey sometimes. Like you might feel cool as a cucumber and they might just be dying to get away from the conversation. And that is normal. So one of the things, we have a list of talking high-level suggestions and talking points. So our first one, I just want to go on record, it's something that we also say to our kids in setting group expectations in sex ed classes. Don't judge, be curious. The moment you give a whiff of judgment to a middle schooler, man, is that dialogue shut down.
It is so easy to shut that down unintentionally sometimes, too, if a parent is just meaning to be joking around a little bit. But
middle schoolers are very sensitive to any perceived judgment, even if you don't mean it.
Yeah. Just thinking about that feeling of everyone is looking at me all of the time, even though no one really cares how you're wearing your jeans. Or
They really don't.
There was this thing in high school that we had, or middle school, of folding and rolling the cuffs of our jeans in a particular way. Yeah, that's probably older than you. But it was...
Well, we had a new way, but I don't want to talk about how we cuffed our jeans.
Yeah. And you had to do it just the right way with your scrunchy socks, just exactly. And if you're not doing that, then everyone must be looking at me. So just that level of sensitivity is how they're feeling. So it is important to really try to approach this with curiosity and not judgment, and even say that out loud. I'm trying to understand what you're telling me. I have no judgment here. I just really want to know more about you because I care about you. Yep. Is the kind of thing that goes a long way to say it out loud.
Which can be really hard when you don't know what your kid's going to say. That's the truth. And these topics are hard. And not having a script and not lecturing them, oh my God, that's so hard. Because you have to just make room for whatever they bring to you. And that's really hard. But possible. The next tip we have is ask about the friends. I love this one. What do middle schoolers care about more than anything in the world? Their friends, their peer relationships. That is really the center of their universe. I love to be dialed in.
Yes, yeah. And I think that it can be a really good way of maybe asking about topics like gender identity and sexual orientation that deflect a little bit of that sensitivity.
Yeah.
Where you can say, do you know someone who might say identify as non-binary, and what does that mean to them?
I love that. And then this is my personal favorite of all. I think this is like parenting gold, and it's not even just about sex and sexuality. Talk to them in the car.
So tell me why you say that. What do you mean? Why is that gold?
So I find that it's really difficult to carve out time to talk, like where you're not distracted by other things, to just talk with your kiddo. And the car has you like in proximity, close with each other. And you don't have to look at each other, because when you're driving the car, you're peripherally focused on other stuff. And I just feel like it takes the pressure off. And there's like a finite amount of time you're going to be in the car with them. So it's like they'll disclose things to you that they might not if you're like sitting at the dinner table, because they can't really, there's no end to that. I have the most beautiful conversations with my daughter in the car. And often they're really organic, and there are times where she will just like something will come up in conversation, and then we can go with that. And it's a non-confrontational, like I'm not arguing with her about housework or did she do her homework. It's just like a space, a really safe space.
It's great. And it's time limited. So all these conversations are generally best done in small, frequent doses.
Yeah, not like your cross-country trip to Colorado where you're trapped for 6 hours and you're like, hey, can you tell me about your gender orientation? Like, no, that would not be. Yeah, that would not be ideal. That sounds like hell, to be honest. Oh. Little snippets.
I've
daily
had
life
conversations
snippets.
Like that. And yeah.
It's fine if the kid brings that to you over your 5-hour drive, but I probably wouldn't be asking curious questions when I knew my kid couldn't get away from me. I'm talking more pick you up from school, drop you at your activity, those little bursts.
So it's also important to know that you are not expected to be the expert about everything. You do not need to know all the answers. It's really okay. And it can be perfectly fine to say to your kid, I don't feel prepared to talk about this yet. Can I go research this and get back to you later?
Yeah, and I've even had times where I've had to tell my kiddo, I don't know developmentally if I'm ready to go there with you yet, so I'll think about that, but it's not a bad question to ask. And I think that can take the pressure off too, because sometimes I hear from parents, I'm afraid I'll talk about something that will basically harm my kid, or I'll say something that they're not ready for. It's okay to pause. Super valid.
Or even say, let's research that together.
Yep. I love that.
Okay. I know that there are lots of questions about gender and sexual orientation that we probably haven't addressed. It is a sensitive topic, and there's a lot going on socially and politically right now. If you have questions like that, please send them to us, and hopefully we will be able to address them in a later episode.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. All right, be well. Thanks for spending time with us today. Don't forget, we would like to hear from you. What do you think of today's episode? What questions or thoughts do you have about sex and sexuality? We will share some questions and replies in a future episode. Write to us at gaspod@gmail.com. That's GASPPOD@gmail.com.
GASP is a joint venture between Dancing Elm Consulting and Cari Hypes.
That's right. And also thank you to Motion Post Inc. for editing, and to the Oak Park Public Library for providing the audio booth.
Thanks also to our sponsor, Oak Park Our Whole Lives. Oak Park OWL delivers comprehensive, inclusive sexuality education to youth and families in the Greater West Side of the Chicagoland area. For more information, check out their website at www.opowl.org.
Take care of yourself and others. Talk to you soon.